They first noticed it in the way humans smiled. Not the wide, toothy expressions they showed in council chambers or diplomatic receptions, but the smaller ones, the ones that didn't quite reach their eyes, the ones that appeared when they were listening very carefully. Most species in the Galactic Assembly assumed humans were unusually polite for a newly spacefaring civilization. They apologized often. They offered trade routes. They sent medical ships to war zones they had no stake in. They negotiated ceasefires between ancient enemies with patience that bordered on sanely. They were, by all appearances, the most reasonable species anyone had encountered in 3,000 standard cycles. That assumption would cost the galaxy dearly. The first human delegation arrived at the assembly aboard a modest vessel called the UNV Horizon Bridge. It was not heavily armed. Its drive signature was average. Its whole composition was unremarkable. But its sensors saw everything. They mapped gravitational anomalies to a precision that made senior navigators uneasy. They logged military traffic patterns that weren't visible to most scanning arrays. They watched, they recorded, they learned, and they smiled. Ambassador Lena Rao was the face of humanity in those early years. Calm, measured, thoughtful, she listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was about cooperation, mutual defense, scientific exchange, and the preservation of life. She never once raised her voice. She never once threatened anyone. She never needed to. At first, the assembly dismissed humanity as a minor power with outsized optimism. Their homeworld had suffered centuries of internal wars before unifying. Their technology was impressive but not revolutionary. Their fleet was small. They were, as one senior counselor described them, dangerous only to themselves. That description aged poorly, because humans did something no other species had done. They paid attention. They studied every conflict in the galaxy, every border dispute, every pirate route, every covert arms shipment, every whispered alliance. They studied not just what species did, but how they did it. They mapped behavioral patterns. They cataloged escalation triggers. They noted which empires bluffed and which ones acted. They built a psychological model of the entire galaxy. Quietly, patiently, like predators watching a herd. The first real test came with the Trillax incursion. The Trillax were expansionists, not cruel, but practical. If a system was weakly defended, they took it. If a species couldn't resist, they absorbed it. They had done this for centuries without serious consequence. The planet Kesari was next. Kesari was small, agricultural, defenseless. They petitioned the assembly for aid. The assembly debated. Humans did not. The UNV Mercy Dawn arrived at Kesari before the debate concluded. It was a hospital ship, unarmed, white hull, humanitarian markings. The Trillax fleet arrived 2 hours later. They demanded the humans leave. Ambassador Rao translated a simple message. This is a medical vessel assisting civilians. We request safe passage. The Trillax commander laughed. He ordered his fleet forward. That was when the galaxy saw the first crack in the human mask. The Mercy Dawn didn't fire. It didn't need to. Because hidden in the asteroid belt, invisible to standard sensors, were 6 human warships that had arrived days earlier and powered down to absolute silence. They did not announce themselves. They did not warn. They simply acted. Within 4 minutes, the Trillax fleet was reduced to drifting wreckage, their drives disabled with surgical precision, their weapons cut away without hull breaches, their ships dead in space. Not destroyed. Neutralized. The humans then transmitted again. You are now safe to leave. Do not return. The Trillax did not return. The assembly praised humanity for its restraint, for its efficiency, for preventing bloodshed. They called it an example of measured intervention. Humans smiled. They did not correct them. Over the next cycles, similar incidents occurred. Pirate fleets vanished after targeting human trade lanes. Slave arenas were dismantled overnight. Rogue warlords found their command ships disabled before battles even began. Humans never claimed responsibility. But everyone knew. And they were grateful. Gratitude turned into reliance. Reliance turned into comfort. Comfort turned into blindness. Because no one asked how humans were always in the right place at the right time. No one asked how they knew. No one asked why they never seemed surprised. The answer was simple. They were hunting, not individuals. Patterns. They hunted instability. They hunted aggression. They hunted anything that threatened the fragile web of galactic peace. And they were very, very good at it. The Vorellan Empire learned this too late. Unlike the Trilax, the Vorellans were proud, militaristic, suspicious of humanity's growing influence. They viewed the humans as manipulators hiding behind diplomacy. They were correct, but not in the way they thought. The Vorellans believed humans were politically cunning. They did not realize humans were biologically wired to identify threats and remove them with terrifying efficiency. The Vorellans decided to test humanity. They orchestrated a false flag attack on a minor human colony in the outer systems. They disguised their ships, used stolen technology, left no obvious trace. It was perfect. Or so they thought. Ambassador Rao did not raise her voice when she addressed the assembly. "We have identified the perpetrators," she said calmly. The Vorellan representative scoffed. "Impossible." Rao smiled. "You left gravitational wave signatures consistent with Vorellan Hall geometry. Your drive harmonics are unique. You vent plasma at a slightly different frequency due to your reactor shielding design. You cannot hide that." Silence filled the chamber. "We request an apology," Rao said, "and reparations." The Vorellans refused. They mobilized their fleet. That was when the galaxy learned what humans did when they stopped pretending. There was no grand declaration of war. No fleet movements visible to long-range scanners. No build-up. One moment, the Vorellan border systems were secure. The next, every major military installation lost power simultaneously. Defense grids failed, communications died, ships wouldn't start. Human cyber warfare had infiltrated their networks months earlier, waiting. Then the human fleet appeared. Not in hundreds of ships. In 20 ships that moved like a single organism. They disabled the Vorellan fleet in under an hour. They did not bombard cities. They did not invade. They went straight for military assets, dismantling the Empire's ability to fight with clinical detachment. Then they stopped. Ambassador Rao translated again. "We are still willing to accept an apology." The Vorellans surrendered. The assembly was stunned. They had never seen war executed like that. So fast. So precise. So utterly merciless to military capability, yet oddly protective of civilian life. They praised humans again. Called them guardians of peace. Humans smiled. Because they knew the truth. They weren't guardians. They were apex predators. And the galaxy was a wilderness that hadn't realized it yet. Predators don't rage. They don't posture. They observe. They wait. They strike only when success is certain. Humans had evolved on a world where the smartest hunters survived, where patience was deadlier than claws, where cooperation in the hunt made them unstoppable. They brought that instinct to the stars. Diplomacy wasn't their nature. It was camouflage. The realization came too late for the Orsethi Combine. The Orsethi believed humans were soft, too invested in ethics, too concerned with collateral damage. They believed this made humans weak. They attacked a human research convoy in deep space, intending to capture advanced technology. The convoy's distress call lasted 12 seconds. By the time it ended, human fleets across 3 sectors were already moving. Not in anger. In response. Every Orsethi military outpost went dark within 6 hours. Every ship lost propulsion. Every weapons platform was rendered inert. The Orsethi didn't even understand what was happening until human vessels appeared in orbit of their homeworld. Ambassador Rao's face filled their sky. "You have demonstrated predatory behavior toward our civilians," she said calmly. "We're responding accordingly." The Orsethi prepared for annihilation. It never came. Instead, humans dismantled their military infrastructure, seized their shipyards, and imposed a planetary quarantine that prevented any future aggression. Then they left. The Orsethi survived. But they would never threaten anyone again. That was when the whispers began. Humans weren't peacekeepers. They were ecosystem regulators. They allowed species to exist, to thrive, to trade, to argue. But the moment a species became a destabilizing predator, the real predator appeared. The day the galaxy finally understood came centuries after first contact. Not through war. Through a mistake. A junior assembly analyst uncovered something in archived human data. A predictive model. It mapped every known species, every conflict, every alliance, and it predicted outcomes with terrifying accuracy. Not just likely wars. Exact timelines. Which empires would rise? Which would fall? Which would attack whom? And in every scenario where chaos spread too far, a human intervention point was marked. Pre-calculated. Pre-planned. Sometimes decades in advance. Humans weren't reacting to threats. They were allowing them to reach a point where removal was easiest. Where resistance would be minimal. Where the lesson would be unforgettable. They weren't diplomats trying to keep the peace. They were hunters managing a territory. The analysts presented the findings to the assembly. Silence followed. Then fear. Because they realized something profound. Humans had never once been surprised by galactic events. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to act. Ambassador Rao, now long retired, was brought back for questioning. She listened to the accusations quietly. Then she nodded. Yes, she said. You figured it out. I demanded a counselor. Rao's expression was gentle. Because you are safer this way. That is not your decision to make. She tilted her head slightly. On our world, if a predator begins killing too much, the ecosystem collapses. Everything dies, including the predator. She paused. We learned to prevent that. You manipulated us. We protected you. You controlled the galaxy. Rao's small smile returned. No, we simply ensured it never tore itself apart. The assembly had no response. Because the evidence was overwhelming. Every major war in the past 2 centuries had ended with quiet human involvement. Every genocidal regime had mysteriously lost power. Every destabilizing force had been removed before it could spread too far. Humans had been pruning the galaxy like a careful gardener. Or a watchful hunter. The revelation changed everything. Species that once saw humans as allies now saw them as something else. Something older. Something patient. Something that could end them at any time and chose not to. Fear spread. But so did understanding. Because no species could deny the results. The galaxy had experienced its longest era of relative peace under human diplomacy. Now they knew why. The humans never denied it again. They didn't need to. They stopped pretending. They still attended council meetings, still negotiated treaties, still offered aid. But the smiles changed. They no longer bothered to hide the watchfulness in their eyes. And every species felt it. The quiet awareness that somewhere, humans were observing, measuring, deciding, not out of malice, not out of ambition, but out of instinct. Apex predators don't dominate for power. They dominate to keep the system stable enough to survive. The galaxy learned to behave. Not because humans demanded it, but because they understood what would happen if they didn't. And so, for the first time in history, peace wasn't maintained by treaties or fear of mutual destruction. It was maintained by the knowledge that somewhere, out in the dark, the true predators were watching, pretending to be diplomats, waiting patiently, just in case.